You know that feeling when you're standing in the grocery store aisle just staring at literally 50 different types of toothpaste, and you find yourself wondering, why on earth do we need so many versions of what is basically the exact same thing? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating economic concept called monopolistic competition. It's basically the hidden machinery driving this entire illusion of choice, and honestly, it dictates almost everything we buy. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to breeze through product differentiation, the true cost of selling, market entry barriers, short versus long-term equilibrium, a showdown between perfect and monopolistic competition, and finally, the price of inefficiency.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Product Differentiation, the Power of Brands.
So why are there so many brands of the exact same thing? To really answer that, we'd kind of have to look back a bit. You see, in the early stages of industrialization, we had a situation much closer to what economists call perfect competition, which is just a market where producers supplied identical goods. But as industries evolved, smaller producers figured something out. They realized they could outsell rivals not by changing the fundamental product, but just by supplying slightly varied commodities to capture your attention. And that brings us perfectly to our main definition for today. Monopolistic competition is essentially a market where a large number of producers supply slightly differentiated products. Because a seller's product is just a little bit different from the rest, maybe it's cooler packaging, minor feature tweaks, or honestly just perception, they gain brand loyalty. And that loyalty gives them a tiny bit of monopoly-like control over pricing. But it's definitely limited. If they hike the price too much, you'll just roll your eyes and switch over to a substitute. Now, because actual price competition carries this huge risk of retaliation from other companies, sellers rely really heavily on non-price competition to build that loyalty. And their absolute biggest weapon here? Advertising. Our source breaks this down into three main forms. First, there's informative advertising, which actually provides honest, useful details about a product. Second, we have persuasive advertising. This aims to divert buyers by kind of playing on our psychological weaknesses. Think of those toothpaste ads where a dentist in a lab coat is used to persuade you. And third, just straight-up exaggerated, false, and misleading ads. Let's move to Section 2, the true cost of selling, paying for the pitch.
So let's actually separate the baseline cost of making a product from the total cost that includes selling it. Notice the two completely distinct curves here. Down at the bottom, we have the production cost curve, but up top, we have the aggregate average cost curve.
The really crucial takeaway here is that the gap between those two curves, that is the selling cost. At any given output, that vertical distance you're seeing is exactly what consumers pay just to be marketed to. Think about that for a second. You aren't just paying for the raw materials and the labor. You are paying a literal premium for the advertisement that convinced you to buy the product in the first place. Which leads us to Section 3, Market Entry Barriers, Building the Moat. You might be wondering, if these companies are making good money, why don't new startups just jump in and undercut them? Well, established brands have built these fascinating structural advantages. New firms are often blocked right out of the gate because the big players might already control the limited raw materials. They also have absolute cost advantages. Basically, the momentum of an early start gives them massive economies of scale. Then, add in those gigantic advertising war chests that terrify new startups, government patents that block anyone from replicating the product, and extreme operational secrecy that hides true costs and profit margins. And honestly, it gets incredibly aggressive behind the scenes. Just listen to this striking detail straight from the source material. Rivals may use thefts, bribery, and canvassing of workers to the extent that the quality of the product of a rival is spoiled. Yep, companies will go to massive, totally under-the-table lengths just to damage a competitor's product and protect their own slice of the pie. Moving right along to Section 4. Short versus long-term equilibrium, the reality check. When we look at this mathematically in the short period, it's pretty wild. Depending entirely on where market demand sits relative to average costs, a firm might rake in absolutely supernormal profits, or they could suffer brutal losses. It's a highly fluctuating state based on current market demand and how well their brand is positioned. But give it enough time and the reality check always hits, because there are no absolutely unbreakable barriers to entry forever. In the long run, new firms are eventually going to chase those high, supernormal profits. When they enter the market, total output rises and the demand price curve shifts downwards until the price drops to match the average cost of production. So those short-term surpluses, they disappear entirely, leading to a state of full cost pricing, where firms really only make normal profits. Let's put this head-to-head. Section 5. Perfect versus monopolistic competition, a market showdown.
Take a close look at this comparison. Notice where that price point intersects with the curve for a monopolistic competitor. Look really closely at where that intersection happens relative to the lowest possible point of the cost curve.
When we dig into the data, the findings are pretty eye-opening. To maintain the exact same price across both models, a perfect competition setup would actually use a higher average cost for the actual production. And since there's nothing suggesting inputs in perfect competition are arbitrarily costlier, this essentially means better actual quality for the buyer at that price point. Monopolistic competition, on the other hand, uses that higher average cost not for better inputs, but just to sell the commodity. You are quite literally funding the marketing department, not buying a fundamentally better product.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the price of inefficiency, the consumer's burden. So what does this all mean for us? The source material is very clear about why this type of market is fundamentally wasteful. First, the firm's equilibrium output is necessarily lower than the optimum, meaning it very often operates at excess capacity, just idling resources. Second, consumers directly bear the burden of those persuasive and misleading advertisements through higher prices at the register. And third, this manufactured brand loyalty directly blocks the emergence of truly competitive, efficient market conditions. Now, while it's true that occasionally selling costs can shift the cost curve favorably to increase output, fundamentally, this system forces buyers to pay higher prices for artificial loyalty and wasted resources.
We've looked at the hidden costs, the super aggressive tactics, and the sheer mathematical inefficiencies of the brands we interact with every single day. Which leaves us with one final provocative thought. The next time you are picking between 50 seemingly identical items on a shelf, ask yourself, is the illusion of choice and manufactured brand loyalty really worth the higher price you're paying at the register? Thank you so much for checking out this explainer, and always keep questioning the systems around you.